remember when I saw I was following Genevieve Bell, I thought my best option now would be suicide, but I'm feeling a little better, so I think we're good to go. So I want to talk to you a little bit. She talked about her first day and the challenge of, women and the rest of the world. And we face similar challenges at Harvard. I know if I asked just a random group of you to name a brand you thought was warm, accessible, friendly, like your buddy you could talk to, Harvard would probably be in the top 5 of those. So you can imagine when I came in, the challenge of help us be relatable and relevant in a digital world with all that is we do, which PS, for all the money you have, you might not be able to buy, admission in, right? So this brand that wants to be accessible and by necessity in some ways is inaccessible. And that was the challenge that faced me and our team as we began our first year at Harvard. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the institution, which is, how many of you have been to Harvard Yard? So you're familiar with this. These are Georgian brick buildings. This is Massachusetts Hall. Harvard's been around since 1636. This building's relatively recent, 1718. So this is a building that, that houses the president and the provost and a few of the students. But it just gives you a sense of the longevity of what's been around. It's a double-edged sword to have been around for so long. On the one hand, you have the heft of your brand. If you do something online, people are going to follow it, retweet it, engage with it. That one of the risks of that is that there's really a laser eye on what you're going to do. And we've been pretty successful without all this digital stuff. One example of this is our newsroom that was in the 1930s. And when you've been around this long, you think of all the ways your organization has faced and dealt with change over the years. So, Harvard was around for the invention of, the telex, the telephone, the car, photography, every modern technology you can think of. Our teams have had to adapt and engage through those times. And you may not have known this, Al Gore invented the internet. Mark Zuckerberg invented Facebook, but Harvard actually invented Twitter in 1910. This is something I found in the archives, which I just loved, because again, to Genevieve's point of humans, what is unchanging about friends and family, and I think this does speak to the rise of status messages and connections, is that people want to be connected, even when they're physically apart. I absolutely love this one. It's like, where the deuce are you? I thought that you were going skating with me this afternoon. I'm furious, McKinney. I swear I've sent text messages like that. And this is from 1910, and that's only 119 characters. They were right on. They left room for the link and everything. I personally have lived through a lot of change. I had my heart set. I was going to be a world champion equestrian, despite showing 0 to no aptitude as a child, but I was sure this was my future. And in Christmas of 1977, I was sure I was going to get a pony. This is what I got instead. Thanks, Dad. It's a TRS 80, some appallingly small amount of RAM, but definitely launched me in my career of how do you think about learning, creating, and change. So I'm going to walk through 2 case studies that are really specific stories. If you work for an enterprise institution, a big institution, and they can be slow and hard to move, and they're full of those annoying humans we've been talking about this morning that have their own desires and needs, but you need to get them from A to B. What are some of the strategies you can adopt to move in that direction? I'm going to talk about 2 specific instances. One is this idea of reimagining a news platform. What is it that Harvard does to share its news with the world? How are we doing it historically? How are we doing it in 2009? And then how did our team work to change that with constituents and stakeholders across the institution? That's one. And then the second, the idea of getting social. So when I arrived at Harvard in the middle of 2009, there were no officially endorsed social media accounts for the institution. And again, that represents that. There were tons of smart students and faculty and brilliant researchers using social media and doing social media, but there was no sort of institutional point of view on how this could be work or advance the institution. So that's the piece that was missing. So we'll talk about those changes. So first I'll start with the news platform. That's Widener Library, if anyone has been there. So the Harvard Gazette launched in the early 20th century. It was a weekly publication. It cost an entire $1 a year for a subscription. And it was primarily events listings. That's what news was considered. It was, we're having an event on our campus. We're distributing this to people who are local, who can attend. And that's what news looks like us today. One of the big shifts in thinking about news at Harvard was this balance of control and influence. And I talk about this in almost every talk I give because I think it's so important to help parse this out when you're in a big organization. So there's such a strong desire when you have a really winning brand to be in the control business, right? It's so gratifying to have a website that's perfectly formed and you know exactly where everything is and there's no troublesome ads or third-party content or people with dissenting views that are cluttering your perfect polished view of the world. But what you lack when you do that, if you focus on control, you give up influence, right? And that speaks to Harvard's lack of a social strategy or even, endorsed accounts in 2009. Because you give up that influence because you're really saying we're going to have a walled garden. Anyone who wants to come to www.harvard.edu, which is approximately no one unless they have a pressing need, is going to have to come to our area and look at our content the way we want to have it. But there was this no sense of the amount of influence you could have if you thought about news not as a destination, but as a syndication. And if you thought about news not as just like, here are these 4 people who we pay money to tell this story, but you think about news as, here are all these, distributed smart people working on fascinating stuff. And how do we begin to think about aggregating and pulling that together? Control and influence also speaks to platform, right? We were so confident of control when you were handing out that Gazette in 1936 or whatever that edition was from. You were very sure that you knew the person was going to sit down with, what do they have then, a pipe? I don't know. And read that newspaper just straight up. But now you can't control, are they in the mood for dining? Are they in the mood for snacking? Are they on a laptop or are they on mobile? Are they a text-based person who are going to read a long article about, our new Beyonce case study, or are they going to want to watch that Beyonce video? I'm not saying what they should do, I'm just saying what you can't buy beyond in that. So 2009, here are the challenges we faced, where it was very much we wanted to transfer from the form that we had, which was HTML-based, print first, then digital, and how do you get people on board to make this kind of change? So great is the enemy of good is one of my favorite sayings, is probably one of yours too. It's a really important saying if you work for a big brand, to say, how do you take, so we took very much a blitzkrieg approach. In 3 months, we're going to rally as many people as we can to start thinking about this content in a different way, to rewrite, reformat, pull in. We're not going to worry about every single piece of content Harvard has put on the internet since 1994, which was probably the first institutional web presence. We're going to port over as much as we can. We're going to iframe the rest. And we're going to really do a blitz approach to get people on board so they have a quick win that they can celebrate. And again, if you are in charge of change management and you want to bring digital delight to your organization, I would say that's one of the most important things you can do, is to find those quick wins. Whether you're new to your job or new to your role, or just you have a project you want to get off the ground, figure out what is the smallest project you can get to a win. And what did that get us? That got us to a faster and easier publishing workflow, more visual design, and more visual sort of reading and content consumption experience across. The other thing we bring to this idea of change management at Harvard is you have to think about it as continuous improvement. I mean, people still, 2014, I kid you not, love the Big Bang website model. You know that, right? I think Jeff Johnson just had a great presentation on that of, you don't do anything to your website. You let the content sort of wither and die in a very pathetic and sad way. And then you say, oh my God, we need $1 bazillion to build a new website. And never mind that child we've neglected and locked in the closet and never fed. This new website, we will totally change all our behavior and we'll, it's like my diet will start tomorrow. I swear to God. That's the view of website development. So one of the things we do around change management is try and change that point of view by saying, in 2013, we did a mild refresh of it to really bring different kinds of, publishing tools to the platform, different kinds of slideshows that were better for mobile, but not having that big bang mentality. So having that change management being part of your job every month and every year, not just occasionally. Part of the way you do this is by changing the way people work. I do believe and agree strongly that it's very hard to change people's nature and what they want to do, but you can change some of the surface stuff and create more collaborative working environment. For us, being able to continually iterate comes from combining designers and developers and editors all in one room. You sort of lock them in with some pizza and see what happens. And then you're able to build things that have more impact, and you're able to iterate far more frequently, which is very important. Another piece of this, I think Jonathan Coleman will talk a little bit about this, is this idea, I love this concept of microcopy or little big details. What are the things you can do that bring delight in a redesign or an iteration of a website? And we focused a lot on what are the small features that you can pull together. If you held a gun to my head and said, what will be the most popular feature in this new email and website we put out, which, we email to 200,000 people a day. It's sort of a big, audience. It's absolutely popular. People want to know what's popular. I would have been 100% wrong, which is why you use analytics, because what was really popular was a next button. And next had a combination of serendipity, like next, just this is what was next in the queue, what we're going to put there, and editorial input of next. Sometimes you read this article on Beyonce, you might be really interested in what happened when the Harvard Business School did a case study on Alex Ferguson. So that's, that was the most popular feature, and I'm a strong believer in all the little big details that you can put through a website redesign to bring delight. Another feature that we worked on that's up there is pulling in the email sign-up into the body of the text. Something, again, we did on a flyer and didn't know it would be hugely successful, but it was. Sort of moving things away from static sign up here to being part of the flow of the news. Some of the other benefits of the redesign, we're really thinking very differently about analytics and making just visual display of analytics much more part of what we did day to day. I think Steve Mulder's going to be talking about analytics here. He's terrific. And one of the things that's really hard is to sell people on these long spreadsheets and these charts and these things that seem impenetrable, but surfacing them more and bringing them more into the day-to-day and the reporting of the health of a project can be really beneficial. All right, the second big area where we had to focus on change is social media. So I was really shocked in 2009 when I came in and there was no sort of official stance, no guidelines, no point of view. HR had, the fear of God in them that social media was going to bring nothing good to them. But there was no real sort of institutional thinking about what is the opportunity here. If you have a brand that people are predisposed to listen to, if even just to sort of roll your eyes and say, oh my God, Harvard, that might be one thing. But another thing is, how do you begin to think about institutionalizing that in terms of what you do? So the first way we thought about it is how do you aggregate all the voices, right? Not the sense of owning and being involved in ownership, but how do we pull together? You want to create some Harvard voices, but you want to think about what are the different people talking about different things, and how do you pull them together thematically? I love what Dave said just now about empowering the audience through the hashtag, and I thought that was an interesting point. That's one of the things we try to do. Harvard is unknowable. It's 21,000 people. It's 11 degree granting institutions. It's students coming in and coming out every year. But one of the things we really try to do is pull through social media. What are the common themes of things that are going on, issues that people are concerned about? Students have used it brilliantly to surface attentions to issues that they're concerned about. And we as an institution try and participate that and also use it as well to talk about things that are part of the natural year, like when people move in and a commencement every year and Harvard-Yale football game. But thinking about what are the ways that aggregation and pulling together can be the delight. And I'll go back to that concept of not control, but influence. Because if you're more in the control business, you're worrying about what are the things we're putting on the internet. If you're in the influence business, you're thinking, what are all these other smart people doing? And how do we weave together a narrative of that great stuff? And that's big underpinning of our social strategy. Coordination is really important when you have an institution this broad and deep. And you can do that, through a hashtag and popularizing a hashtag. But you can also do that through guidelines, which we, share across the institution, and pulling together different voices who can talk and share about their experiences using social. So that's a big part of what we do. I just love this photo. This is two sisters who play piano together in the houses and do these appearances. That was like the perfect demonstration of a coordinated approach. This is a campaign we did around Harvard in autumn, which pulls together images of the campus around the university in the fall. And we focus a lot about what makes content shareable. I think it's really important to think about having a content strategy that's, of course, highly visual, highly measurable, incorporates audio and video. But what are the things that people are going to share, and then how do you build off that? How do you understand more with each thing they share? But again, to the point of you don't want to get boredom, and then delight. You don't want to pull them off the track. You want to think about what are the things that we know that people are interested in. People always care about campus shots. That's something that will automatically do well. But how do we intersperse things that we think people really might be interested in about the university but don't have any knowledge of? Another area of social where we've really tried to work together to bring delight is this idea of authenticity. So what are these things that are authentic to Harvard that you can begin to surface up? That 1910 Twitter example is one of them. But another example would be, what are some of the amazing library assets that we have that we can pull up and use to tell the story? So I think to get people on the bus for change, and that's really the purpose of this talk, you need to figure out ways that they can contribute and be part of the change. I've seen so many digital change management projects fail. I've been responsible for some of those failures in other institutions because it's this view of this top-down. We're just going to tell everybody they need to work differently. We're going to tell everybody they need to do differently. But I think the combination of the technology and the culture to let people be part of the change. So when we're talking about reconfiguring the Gazette, involving the editors in how things are built, locking them in that room with the designers and developers so they understand the constraints rather than just throwing something over the wall and expecting it to be built and then being disappointed when they don't get what they want. I think that's one way. And I think through social, by empowering local units to bring up content that's relatable and relevant for them. And that's what this T.S. Eliot piece is an example of, because that's what pulls them into the game and makes them want to be part of the positive change and part of the delight. So this is a great change management case study in and of itself. Is anyone a big Gangnam Style reenactor, anything I should know about? But Tsai came to Harvard's campus and he met with President Faust in her office. And I think there's this, the desire, you have a president of an institution, it's a very august role, that photos be very managed and curated, and that's something that the institution has had to let go of. But I loved it when this went up. Of course, he immediately takes a picture in her office, immediately puts it on Twitter, and I take a look at it, and I think it looks pretty great. Like, she's looking like she's having kind of an awesome time just hanging out with this guy. So he puts it out on Twitter, and I may or may not have gotten a panicked phone call from someone saying, we need to fix the internet. That's often how my phone calls start. There's something wrong on the internet. I'm pretty sure it's your fault. I need you to fix it. It's sort of how my job goes. So he said, what are we going to do? He just put a picture up. Like, he didn't ask. It's on the internet. What do we do? And I said, well, it's too late. Mike already retweeted it. Like, we're done. Like, what are we going to do? But I think making that shift is really, really hard in enterprise institutions. And I think the way you get people to understand it is by making it transparent what works and what doesn't, by empowering local people to be part of it. So that's one of my favorite sort of social media update case studies. I think I put this up here to talk, not only about, we've done well with the social stuff, relatively small to a corporate brand, but pretty big for higher ed, but more to say that I think the other part of change management, which, may sound a little bit more conservative, is people want to be a part of a winning effort. They want to be part of something that's moving in the right direction. So I think celebrating the wins, giving people part of something, and helping them all understand their role in making your efforts successful is really key for success. How do you keep it up? I mean, that's really important to me too. Like, you come in and you rebuild some websites and you think about online learning through Harvard X, and you get people engaged, and we're thinking differently about this now. But how do you clear the bar but also keep up the momentum? This is something I feel really strongly about. I'll give you a second to look at that cartoon. But I always say my job at Harvard is to be the truck driver. So it's to think about not only to lead, right? Not only to sort of, the first two parts of digital leadership is what you do, but it's also owning what you do. So I always figure if I'm the guy and I'm driving the truck over the bridge over and over and over, and someone in Harvard College or the Business School sees, that I've left to spend more time with my family, they will know how much weight was too much for the truck, right? They will have a sense for that. But I think it's an important point about leadership, that not only do you want to be the person who advances things and pushes things forward, but to own the consequences of that leadership, positive or negative. And anyone who tells you they know exactly the right digital strategy for their enterprise institution for the next 5 years is lying. I say my predictions go down with 20% accuracy every year out, and everybody wants a 5-year plan. It's problematic. The second piece is really focusing on coordination. How do you build a team across the organization that can help and support you? This is Harvard's 42nd varsity team. It's women's rugby. They just came in this year. So, but what's your checklist for change agents? How do you think about who are the right people to help you, develop change in your institution? Who's the right person to lead it? I've touched on a few of these, but I'll go over them now. The most important thing, I think, is find a quick win that solves a problem. Not something that you think would be fun or easy to do, as much as something that, there's a presenting problem. In our case with the Gazette, it was, we have this news vehicle, nobody reads it. There was 200,000 page views in 2009. It was 8.5 million in 2013. So there was an opportunity there, obviously, for growth out of Harvard, but find that quick win. A second is, embrace and celebrate, the minimum viable product versus, the detour down that long and perilous consensus highway, right? What is the thing that you can build that most people can agree we're pretty good that will solve the problem? And you do that through a lot of prototyping and a lot of engagement. Another tactic we have for pulling off the big projects is by getting, leadership like the president to sign off on a strategy brief versus on creative. So what are the things, what are the results we want in the world, versus how are we going to get there and what color blue do you really think is right to go with that crimson? A third is, to allow risk but define what's acceptable failure. We're in a capital campaign now. That's an important, fundraising effort. There are things absolutely we should continue to iterate and take risks with. There are things that would be very foolhardy to do right now. So finding out what that balance is and sort of setting a perimeter, like geo-fencing your risk area, I think is really important. So people know where is inbound to try and experiment with new things and what are the things that probably shouldn't be touched. To share your mistakes and lessons learned. I think that can be really hard in any enterprise institution, but it can be particularly hard at a place like Harvard, where the pressure is on to be institutionally, excellent all the time. And believe me, there's now that, articles are paid for by click, the propensity for Harvard to end up in the headline is a perilous one. So I think it's really important to think about how do you create a culture of sharing your mistakes so people can understand how did you make the mistake, how did you recover from it, and how are you not going to make it again, versus putting up this wall of mistakes do not happen. And when you're in an enterprise, the idea of keeping one eye on the horizon is super important. Not the horizon of the future, because I told you about my 20% accuracy problem, but I think the horizon of what's outside, what's going on outside in the world. I think before it was very neat. If you were in higher education, you compared yourself to higher education. If you were leading nonprofit, leading a nonprofit. If you sold CPG, you compared to CPG. Now your consumer, again, those unchangeable things about humans, is not going to make those neat and tidy distinctions. You are compared up against everything. So if someone who spent 4 years at Harvard and paid full tuition and had a wonderful time feels like they know, our Department of Alumni Affairs knows less about them than their local bike shop, that's a problem. So we need to find out ways that people can feel connected and look outside to what are the other, brand, human, social, online experiences that they're having and realize that we're benchmarked against that. I just wanted to close with this quote because I thought it was a really interesting parting shot. I don't know, how many of you saw the New York Times Magazine piece on design last weekend? It was in T Magazine. I thought this quote was just fabulous because I think there's a huge opportunity right now to advance change and promote collaboration that leads to delight because of this stuff. Because design is taking such a front and leading role in how we experience the world, from how you call a cab with an app to how you pay your bills online. There are just so many things that have been transformed by design in a more visible way. I think that was always been true, but now we're just much more aware of it. But I think there's a real opportunity for us as creators, whether you're creating content strategy for websites or you're creating information architecture, whether you're creating multimedia. I think there's a huge opportunity for collaboration and looking to collaborate through design and having that be the way you affect change in the world. Thank you very much.